One of my favorite things in movies is when a supporting actor completely steals a movie. Like Heath Ledger's Joker, it's the best. In mixed martial arts, the equivalent would be a fight of the night lower on the card, stealing everybody's thunder. But in our sport, sometimes a fighter doesn't even need to be on the card for them to end up being the only thing anybody is talking about related to that event. And so let's take a look at the ones who cast the biggest shadow without even stepping into the cage. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point. A massive thank you to our channel Hall of Fame members for supporting videos like this one, and these are 10 times outside fighters completely stole the show. Number 10, Chris Cyborg, UFC 208. You'll find as we go along in this video that oftentimes these situations of an outsider stealing all the attention are because the UFC made a really silly decision regarding one of their titles. Case in point, when the promotion decided to make an entire division for Chris Cyborg and then have two other fighters compete for the inaugural title instead of her.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Without question, not even remotely close, like Banana Republic election results, everybody on the planet knew that Chris Cyborg was the greatest featherweight fighter in the entire world. It wasn't up for any kind of debate. So when she couldn't make the date the UFC wanted, a theme you will absolutely see throughout this video, they just said, well, we gotta headline a pay-per-view with something. So they made the terrible decision to headline UFC 208 with Holly Holm and Jermaine Durandamy to kick off the featherweight division. It was a huge misstep during a hot time for the UFC. This card only sold 200,000 pay-per-view units.
You know, not one of our better events. I was hoping that the main event would deliver, and that didn't happen.
Now, would Chris have boosted that up much? Probably not, but the integrity of the division was already compromised, even more so when GDR refused to defend against Cyborg and was stripped of the gold. Chris sat front row to remind everyone that this whole thing should have been about her, and still was. A stronger card might not have been overshadowed, but this one definitely was. The UFC's own damn news story on their own site after the event was all about Cyborg even. Just baffling choices all around. Number 9, Brock Lesnar, K1 USA show. There is a long history of Brock Lesnar stealing the show just in life in general. I'd imagine he does so when he walks down a street. He did it in the WWE when he burst onto the scene. He did it during the preseason in the NFL when he was signed by the Vikings. And of course, his history in mixed martial arts, especially given his short run, is particularly show stealing, and not just cards he was involved with himself. UFC 199 was nearly overshadowed by the Ariel Helwani banning drama, sparked by the reveal of Lesnar's return at 200. Of course, in the MMA bubble, Bisping's massive upset win was the biggest story, and outside of it, Ariel being banned was on every major sports talk show. Another great example of the UFC shooting themselves in the foot, but the big Lesnar news was the spark. Then there was Brock's confrontation with DC after he became double champ. Again, not completely show stealing given the historic nature of what took place, but holy hell, the video has 17 million views on YouTube. The best lesser known story though is when Lesnar announced his MMA career in the first place. It was a K1 show headlined by his eventual scheduled debut opponent, Hong Man Choi, a fight that of course would never take place. After the final fight of the show, Lesnar entered the ring, I'm sure to the shock of everyone since this was in Las Vegas, and announced that he was going to be competing for K1's MMA brand Heroes.
This ring kind of feels a little bit comfortable to me. I think maybe we could work something out here.
And this is the insane part, that he was going to be trained by Royce Gracie, who then joined him in the ring and said, I am a jiu-jitsu fighter and you have the wrestling, a good combination, the next heavyweight champion. Absolutely fucking wild. But yeah, as you can imagine, nobody cared about anything at that K1 show, just Brock's debut. Number 8, CM Punk, UFC 181. So this was a pretty damn solid card. You had the rematch between Robbie Lawler and Johnny Hendricks headlining. You had Showtime Pettis in his only successful defense against Gilbert Melendez, Travis Brown stole Brendan Schaub's soul. There was a really cool comic book poster. Why the UFC doesn't do more shit like that, I do not know. It was a solid night, worth whatever the hell pay-per-views cost in 2014, probably a nickel. But the entire show was overshadowed by the most absolutely random news ever, and that was that Phil Brooks, known to the wrestling community as CM Punk, had signed a deal to fight in the UFC.
CM Punk, welcome to the UFC.
Thank you.
I gotta admit, somewhat surreal talking
Thanks
to
for
you.
having me. This is the guy that did the deal right here.
On the broadcast itself, Joe Rogan made the announcement before a brief interview, and given Punk's level of stardom, he was essentially the biggest name in wrestling when he left the WWE earlier that year, and the fact that he had absolutely no experience in mixed martial arts, on top of everybody having no clue what this actually meant, like who the hell is he even fighting, the whole social media world was buzzing, and tons of outlets outside your normal sports coverage picked up the story, completely dwarfing any conversation about what even happened at 181, other than Punk's signing. You could absolutely argue that his debut also overshadowed UFC 203 2 years later. Poor Stipe never gets the respect he deserves. And given the pay-per-view boost Punk was believed to have brought to the card, it's safe to say that he stole the show in every way but his performance. Number 7, Colby Covington, UFC 228. More like Darren Shill is probably something Colby would say.
Greetings, nerds and virgins.
I don't think he ever gave a nickname to Till. Hey, tell me if you've heard this one before. The UFC makes an interim champion out of someone, only to not have them compete for the real title in a fight that makes the most sense and that everybody was wanting to see, and then they book some random unnecessary fight instead. Now, don't get me wrong, 228 and 309 are not apples to apples. They might not even be apples to pears, but there are certainly parallels there. It's almost like the UFC books events to fill dates and not keep divisional continuity. Everybody's favorite nerd and virgin Colby C had made a big splash with his big persona and backed it up with an interim title victory that was meant to set up a massive bad blood fight with champ Tyron Woodley. But the UFC almost immediately ruined it. Just 3 months after they had the guy fight for gold, the UFC stripped Covington. At least they had the sense to not leave the belt on him while the champ defended like more recent times, because Colby couldn't do the September date they wanted for his bout with Woodley. Instead, popular upstart Till was given the headlining spot, with Colby using his growing social media presence to remind everybody that this whole situation made zero sense.
I just want an explanation why I'm not fighting for the belt this weekend.
Stop filming.
Come on, bro.
Till, someone the UFC was building for stardom, was absolutely demolished in the bout that felt way too soon, only adding to the narrative that it should have been Covington or nothing. Colby tried his best to steal the show at Woodley's next defense against Kamaru Usman by showing up on Fight Week with a little megaphone, but unfortunately for him, Askren's debut and Tyron being dethroned were the real headlines the next day. Number 6, Habib Nurmagomedov, UFC 249. How much did the interim title fight between Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson get entirely overshadowed by the absence of Habib Nurmagomedov? When Gaethje won the fight, he threw the interim title on the ground.
Why'd you just throw that off?
Wait for the real one.
This was a worst-case scenario last-second attempt to salvage an event that was being put on under some of the most extraordinary circumstances in modern world history. So this time, I will cut the UFC some slack. Habib was, for the 5th and sadly final time, booked to finally compete against Tony Ferguson and prove without a doubt he was the best lightweight in the world at the time. But as COVID restrictions ramped up, Habib found himself unable to travel to the United States, and so a month before the fight would happen, the UFC announced that it would now be an interim title bout between Ferguson and Gaethje. Given the level of prestige that Habib had found in his reign, and the fact that Tony Ferguson question continued to loom, there was no way that this entire event couldn't be overshadowed by Nurmagomedov's absence, even with the insanity of the pandemic and the UFC doing a pay-per-view without a crowd for the first time ever. It was just a bitter situation, all the more devastating after Ferguson lost, and the fight with Habib was lost forever. Once Nurmagomedov did return and unified the title against Gaethje, he of course retired undefeated, and yet again cast his massive shadow from the outside looking in on another event, UFC 262, when Charlie Olives and Mike Chandler fought for the division's now vacant gold, just half a year after Habib called it a career. Number 5, Chael Sonnen, UFC 151. If there is anybody who is the king of stealing the show, it is Chael P. Sonnen. The P stands for opportunist. 151 was at the time one of the biggest disasters the promotion had ever faced. Their first ever canceled pay-per-view event cost them millions and millions, and they never recovered from it financially. That's why Jon Jones can't get Deontay Wilder money.
To this day!
Anyway, Dan Henderson, who was meant to fight Jones for the light heavyweight title in the main event, blew his knee out and didn't let anybody know until Fight Week, so the UFC did their Zach Morris-ass thing, where they scramble at the last second to make something work and get away with it. But this time, there was a monkey in the wrench. That monkey being that they were asking people to fight the greatest fighter in the world with zero prep. Everybody turned it down. Everybody but someone you wouldn't even think was eligible for the opportunity, the middleweight American gangster.
He said, Jon Jones. And I said, put me in, coach.
But in a Damon Lindelof-like twist, it was Jones and his crew that said, nope, we're not fighting Chael on short notice. Thus, the card, which was ultra-thin single-ply, got shelved entirely. Sonnen then went on a media tour going after Jones.
Jon Jones just lost his protective status. You know, he's lost that status. So Jon Jones' ability to duck me and stay away from me is gone.
A strategy that would earn him not only an entire season of Tough with Jon, but a title shot after the show in a division he hadn't competed in since Get Rich or Die Trying was released. Nobody does show stealing like West Lynn's finest. Number 4, Francis Ngannou, UFC 265. The heavyweight champion of the world was so show-stealing that the intro package for the event, for the first and probably only time ever, revolved around a fighter who wasn't on the card, mainly because the UFC was looking to take a shot at the champ for not competing, but he was the focus nonetheless. The issue at 265 was like so many things, created by the UFC themselves, as they decided to make an entirely unnecessary interim title fight between Derek Lewis and Cyril Gane. After telling Ngannou that the summer was booked up, the UFC was shocked to find out that Ngannou would not have enough time to prepare for an August card, but instead would be ready by September. Rather than wait a single month, they booked this pointless main event, with the entire narrative from any side you looked at it focused almost entirely on Ngannou.
Ngannou fought when? 3 months ago? Come on. An interim title for what? What are we doing here?
Gane would win that interim gold and lose to Francis in the unification bout before the champion would leave the promotion, citing irreconcilable differences. This left 285 very much about Ngannou as well, with Jon Jones making a long-awaited debut at heavyweight against the guy Ngannou already beat before he left with the belt. The longing for the fight to crown the true heavyweight king between Ngannou and Jones spilled over into stealing the show from the PFL, when the two had an awesome and frustrating stare-down that garnered 2 million views on PFL's YouTube channel, one of their most viewed uploads ever. What was the PFL event? Shit, I couldn't tell you. Which is the point. The only story coming out of it was, oh my god, Jones and Ngannou looked at each other for a brief period of time. Speaking of JBJ, number 3, Jon Jones, UFC 200. Johnny Bones wasn't meant to be an outsider for UFC 200. In fact, he was going to be its star, but he would end up completely overshadowing from the outside under extraordinary circumstances, not to mention the madness and show-stealing that preceded this situation. 200 seemed snake-bit from the start, with Conor McGregor, the original headliner, versus Nate Diaz, getting pulled for skipping media obligations.
You can't not show up to promote your fight. You can't do it.
Or because Dana knew the card would sell without him and they didn't want to piss fans off, so they pretended that there was a problem, thus making 200 and 202 near back-to-back million-plus buy events. I want to believe. Anyway, so there was that whole mess, and then came Johnny Bones. If you want to talk about stealing the show, UFC 187's main event for Jon's vacant title between DC and Rumble only took place because Jon played Destruction Derby with an unwilling participant and then went on the lam. 200 was the culmination of that disaster's aftermath, with Jon finally back to reclaim his throne from Cormier. That was, of course, until he was flagged by USADA days before the event, leaving the UFC with no choice but to make Amanda Nunes versus Miesha Tate the main event of one of their all-time biggest shows. It was a weird night that pretty much sucked, honestly, and everybody was thinking the whole time, god damn it, Jon. It's kinda insane when you think about all the times that Jones has overshadowed a card that he did not fight on. The man is the main character of mixed martial arts. Or maybe it's this guy. Number 2, Conor McGregor, UFC 223. The Irish madman has a tendency to overshadow a lot of things in this sport, but 223 was most certainly the time he did it to the point where the entire event is more so known for his outside involvement in it than anything else. You could say that Bellator event where he jumped in the cage to batter Mark Goddard made a bigger impact on that show, as it was literally the only thing anybody was talking about, but that wasn't a big card. 223 was a massive one, with a massive and of course ultimately doomed main event. In any other scenario, Tony Ferguson tripping over a production cable and losing a title opportunity in a fight that had been booked 4 times would dominate the narrative, but instead it was McGregor's assault on motor vehicles by way of moving devices. Conor and main eventer Habib Nurmagomedov had a real Jets-Sharks feud going, minus the singing and dancing. And after Nurmagomedov disrespected McGregor's boy, he flew a posse of ruffians to NYC to beat everybody up. But they did damage a bus with a dolly, got 3 fights canceled, and ended up seeing Conor thrown in the slammer. Temporarily, of course. The absolute batshit moment transcended the sport and certainly the shambles left of 223 in the wake of McGregor and a production cable. Number 1, Tom Aspinall, UFC 309. The expression elephant in the room doesn't even do this one justice. It might as well be the Boeing 747 in the room. Not only did Tom Aspinall's presence completely overshadow UFC 309, it's overshadowed Jon Jones' entire life for the last year or so.
He's annoying to me. He's annoying to me.
In case you've been living under an MMA-less rock, this British dude, Tom Aspinall, won interim heavyweight gold a year ago. You know, the thing that's the placeholder for the champion while they're away, and then when they get back, there's a unification bout. Except this time, the UFC decided to make this temporary title and then ignore it entirely, as did heavyweight champion Jon Jones. Originally meant to fight Stipe Miocic after winning the vacant title in March of 23, since the real champ left the promotion, things got complicated when, right before the bout, JBJ shredded his pec, and not in the good way, forcing a a year-long hiatus. In the meantime, Aspinall won interim gold against division boogeyman Sergey Pavlovich, and then defended that title against top 5 mainstay Curtis Blades, all while being a pretty likable guy. When Jones was set to return, it was not against Tom, but against Stipe, and 309's entire fight week and main event, which Aspinall was the backup for, revolved around the fact that the champ should have been fighting the interim champ. Is this too soon after it happened to be number 1? Potentially, but I think this entry is going to age very, very well. Aspinall dominated this narrative.
I'm the best heavyweight in the world. Prove me wrong, John.
And you know who dominated this video? The editor, Max Randall. Dude always produces bangers. Follow him on his socials. Go check out his kick-ass YouTube channel. Another big shout out to the Hall of Famers. If I could give every single one of you knucks, I would. Fight fans, join the Hall of Fame. Hit the join button, get exclusive content, and some other really cool stuff. Like and subscribe, or Jon Jones will overshadow your life. Leave a comment down below about any show stealers that were your favorites. And thank you so much for watching, guys. Have a wonderful day.